Last week, we talked about SoFi sentiment increasing as we head closer into earnings. Well, this week, it seems that sentiment is compounding on itself. We're seeing analysts continue with double-digit price increases. We're seeing short interest falling. We're seeing SoFi reporting partnerships left and right. A lot of exciting news. Let's jump right into it. First and foremost, if you are new to the channel and to this series, I urge you to subscribe for more SoFi content. I make multiple videos a week on SoFi exclusively, and I make a video every Friday on all the SoFi news that I saw this week. As of last video, 66% of viewers were not subscribed, and doing so helps this channel grow and get the word out. So if you do enjoy the content, make sure to hit that subscribe button. As always, first let's talk about the stock price action for this week, and then we can talk about the news. SoFi finished down 2.2% this week. It climbed up to about $7.90 on Tuesday, and then when the CPI report came out on Wednesday, it spent the remainder of the week just giving up those gains. It closed around $7.34. Moving on to the news, we got March web traffic numbers. Last weekend, Kyle posted the March web traffic numbers from SimilarWeb, showing a bounce back. Higher web visits than February at 16.3 million visits. I also saw a post on Wednesday that Tanner put together with a cleaner monthly breakdown for the web traffic. We can see here that in Q1 2024, we saw the highest reported website traffic for SoFi at 48 million visits according to SimilarWeb. So this is for the entire quarter, January, February, and March put together. Of course, the idea behind tracking web traffic is that it's going to translate to new members, which I don't think is a great correlation because, for example, I can access SoFi's website here from Canada, and that's going to count as a web visit for them, but I can't buy SoFi's products in this country. And so there's a lot of situations like that where you have a lot of visits that don't translate to more members necessarily. However, if you strictly look at it from a brand awareness perspective, how many people are familiar with the SoFi brand, how many people have visited their website, know their products, then that's still great to see because directionally it's still heading up in the right direction that we want to see, right? So I want to group the remaining topics into a few themes. I want to start first with some of the shortest themes around partnerships. We saw two major partnerships this week, and the reason why it's a short theme is because I made a separate video detailing both of these partnerships in much more depth than I want to cover here. So if you haven't seen that, I highly recommend you watch that. But the two partnerships are on Monday when SoFi partnered with the National Association of Realtors. And this partnership was around offering exclusive rates and discounts for the NAR members and their clients. The National Association of Realtors has over 1.5 million members, which represents a significant potential customer base for SoFi. Not to mention that this partnership can lead to referrals, it can lead to cross-selling, it can lead to increased brand awareness in that real estate industry in general. I won't dive too much more in depth on that specifically. As I said, I made another video. The second partnership came on Tuesday when SoFi partnered with the professional golfer Wyndham Clark, the number 4 world-ranked player and reigning US Open champion. This deal is a multi-year partnership, and there's really two benefits that I saw around the timing. Number one, we have the TGL Golf League starting in January. That's going to be on ESPN. Wyndham Clark is a committed member to that league. So he's going to be participating, wearing the SoFi branding everywhere. Number two, Wyndham Clark is making his debut at the Masters tournament this week. As I'm making this video, they're playing right now. So that's also good because there's going to be media attention on him as well. He's wearing SoFi branding everywhere. And for reference, the Masters typically attracts around 10 to 13 million viewers, which is pretty good visibility for SoFi because more than likely SoFi is going to be running ads during this event. With this partnership, SoFi now has their brand in multiple different sports arenas. They have the NBA, the NFL, the TGL. And so this is a perfect synergy with SoFi's marketing strategy in general to partner in that sports arena. Now, like I said, I dove into both of these partnerships much more in depth, and I want to save time in this video to actually talk about topics I haven't covered. So definitely check out that other video for more details on those partnerships. Moving on now to the biggest pieces of news this week, we got updated short interest numbers for SoFi for the March 28th filing. SoFi short interest came in at 171 million shares sold short, down 38 million from the 209 million shares sold short as of March 15th, meaning that in the past 2 weeks alone, short interest on SoFi has fallen from the record 23% down to 17%. And I think much of this is on the back of these analyst notes. Also, there could have been hedges on the stock as a result of the convertible note offering, which might have affected this number. But I think the analyst piece is more interesting because that ties into this whole sentiment conversation that I'm talking about. So we had two major analyst notes this week, one from Citi and one from Deutsche Bank, both of which gave SoFi a double-digit price target. So first of all, let's start with Citi's analyst note, and then we'll move on to Deutsche's. Citi reinitiated coverage on SoFi with a buy rating and an $11 price target. Citi had coverage on SoFi previously, but in the note, I found a couple of pieces here interesting because the Citi analyst here basically said in their report that they're now including the capital markets transactions. In other words, they're including the 2029 convertible note offering that SoFi did at the beginning of March. Saying that this is going to improve SoFi's risk-based capital ratio and that it's going to be accretive to the company's GAAP income for the first quarter of 2024. Basically saying that we're going to see the positive benefits of this transaction as early as Q1, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. Now, the second note came just a few days later on Thursday, where Deutsche Bank maintained its hold rating on SoFi with a $12 price target. Now, this was an interesting note as well. The note highlighted, quote, "The decision comes after an analysis of SoFi's recent capital structure transactions, which have notably influenced its stock price." In their note, Deutsche's assessment also indicates that SoFi's future performance outside of lending is going to be critical in assessing the company's long-term valuation. So essentially, they're calling for the company to continue to ramp up product lines that are essentially non-lending dependent. In other words, financial services, technology platform. The funny part here is that it is a hold rating and not a buy rating, despite the price target being over 60% higher than where the stock is trading at today. And so you're thinking to yourself, the stock's at $7.40. The price target is at $12. Why is this a hold rating? And I have no answer to that. However, I do have a few thoughts on these notes specifically. So last week, we talked about sentiment shifting to the positive, right? We talked about analyst upgrades. And this week, as we get closer to earnings, we see that trend continuing. Both of these analysts, despite one of the ratings having a hold, but both of them had double-digit price targets, $11, $12. This raises that average price for SoFi of what it should be trading at. And what's more, most, if not all of these analyst offerings on SoFi, the upgrades are coming as a result of the 2029 convertible note offering. Analysts are all accounting for the benefits of the note offering in their models. We have higher price targets because the models are changed and the expectations for SoFi to perform are higher. Yet Wall Street as a whole, if we do an aggregate, is still expecting super modest numbers for Q1. The upcoming earnings report is essentially flat, just barely in the black, and Q2 is not much better. For Q1, analysts are expecting 0 to 0.01 in EPS, and the same for Q2 as well. They're averaging up to get to a penny EPS for both of these quarters. And I think that, what we know about SoFi so far is that they can definitely come in pretty strong with regards to these numbers. However, all of this goes along with my previous comments on the tides turning for SoFi and that sentiment overall. And this is positive as we've learned, especially in the short term, because what we know is analyst price targets have an effect on the stock in the short term. And if they're positive, then that's all good, right? We got KBW downgrading us in January and the stock fell 14% as a result of it. So you want analysts to have these double-digit price targets because it brings up the overall sentiment in the stock in general. Some more minor news affecting SoFi this week. We had CPI data for March come in on Wednesday. That pulled back the entire market. CPI came in hotter than expected at 3.5%, and it caused the entire market to pull back because Wall Street now expects fewer cuts from the Fed because inflation is creeping back up. Of course, if inflation stays high, then you're going to have this higher for longer situation. And this matters because in SoFi's guidance, from a macro perspective, that's dependent on the underlying economy. For example, I made a tweet earlier this week saying in January, Wall Street guided for 6 rate cuts. SoFi conservatively guided for 4 rate cuts. Now, in March, after we have a hot CPI, we've had a couple of hot CPIs actually, Wall Street is predicting only 2 rate cuts, and some are even predicting no rate cuts at all this year. So SoFi's 4 rate cuts that are accounted in their guidance no longer seem very conservative. But this is good because it allowed SoFi to have that flexibility where in January we're saying, this is crazy, they're being super conservative. And now we're saying, oh, maybe it's not so crazy anymore. But the underlying assumptions for SoFi's rate cuts were that the economy is not going to hold up, is that unemployment is going to go to 5%. Unemployment in general is not going to be great. And so I'm not too concerned about the hot CPI because I think it's too early to tell the downstream negative implications for that. We still have a large part of the year left to go, and just because we had CPI come in at 0.1% hotter than expected doesn't mean that we're going to reach the 5% unemployment that SoFi has accounted for in their guidance, right? And so that's one point I want to make, is to say, like, we're still in the early innings of the year, and a lot can happen between now and the end of the year that can determine what the guidance is and whether it's appropriate. Number one. Number two, SoFi has proven that they can perform well in any environment, and so I don't really want to make a massive deal out of a 0.1% hotter than expected CPI report, although it's not a great trend from a rate cut perspective, and that drags the entire market back, and we saw that this week with SoFi stock. And finally, to wrap this video up, on the minor news front, something that doesn't affect SoFi that much, the Biden administration is out again for giving student loans. The reason why this doesn't matter for SoFi is because we've seen this story play out before. Around the midterm election, the administration did the exact same thing, and it resulted in a court decision for them. It resulted in something that got struck down by the court, and the reason why is because the president doesn't have the power to forgive student loans without congressional approval. They need to basically approve that. And so while I'm not surprised that this is resurfacing so close to the election, just months to go before the election, I am surprised that people still really are buying into the fact that they think this is going to happen. In either case, the thing that affected SoFi the most the first time around was the moratorium, not the forgiveness, because the forgiveness didn't really apply to SoFi's customer base. SoFi has a more affluent, higher earner customer base that generally does not correspond with forgiveness. Forgiveness generally corresponds with earners that have under 100,000 in terms of income, and that just wasn't SoFi's ideal customer profile. So I'm not too concerned about this. Number one, to say that this has to go through the same approval process, and that's going to take a long time. And personally, I'm not really hopeful that this is going to get passed. It's just a promise at this point. And number two, even if this does get passed, it still won't affect SoFi's customer profile because SoFi has affluent customers. Overall, really interesting to see the continuation in the changes in sentiment we saw from last week carry over into this week. Because right now we only have 2 weeks left before the earnings, and the stock remains in the mid $7 range. In these upcoming weeks, I want to see if SoFi has more analysts coming out and adjusting their price targets upwards, and I want to see if SoFi has more positive sentiment behind it as we head into the Q1 earnings. I'm going to be talking more about this on the SoFi Weekly podcast later tonight on this channel, so make sure you come back and tune into that at 10 p.m. Eastern Time on this channel. And remember, 66% of you were not subscribed the last time I posted a video like this last Friday. So make sure you take a moment and subscribe to the channel if you found value in this video. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.